rights are and of right ought to be free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And freedom of speech is essential to that. On college campuses, yes. In the media, yes. In the culture, yes. In politics, yes. We need to be able to speak our minds. So let's dive into this topic with our great lineup of guests today, starting with Isabel Brown, who is a 2019 graduate of Colorado State University. Of course, we're here broadcasting from Colorado with a degree in biomedical sciences and recently earned her master's degree at Georgetown University in biomedical sciences policy and advocacy after serving as a Turning Point USA chapter founder and president for 2 years at CSU, and as a TPUSA ambassador. Isabel recently became a Turning Point USA contributor to continue sharing this message, and Isabel joins us now. Welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. Happy Free to Choose Friday.
Hi there, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me on today.
It is great to have you on the program. I saw you speak last summer at the Western Conservative Summit and gave an incredible address. So I want to set the table here because you're a recent graduate. I graduated from Regis University in Denver in 2011. I can tell you, while free speech was under attack back then, it was nothing like it is now, I think. Kind of give us a big picture view of what's going on. Let's start with college campuses, and then we'll get into why free speech is important in other areas of life.
Well, my run-in with the free speech police really began as a college student myself here in the beautiful state of Colorado. I had chosen to attend Colorado State University, the big cowboy school right up the road from where I grew up just outside of Denver, and never anticipated that I would be facing the very extreme political backlash associated with conservative beliefs throughout my 4 years at Colorado State University. I was having run-ins with inclusive language guides on what I was and wasn't allowed to say for my on-campus jobs. As a loud conservative activist with Turning Point USA, I often received threats of violence or death threats, and even had my personal apartment address posted online simply for wanting to bring diversity of thought to campus. So what I experienced as a college student really set the stage for what I do now as a spokesperson with Turning Point USA, being exposed to an all-out assault for free speech for all college students across the country.
So in terms of campus speech, I mean, why is it important to allow for the free expression of different ideas on campus as opposed to saying, hey, we need to make sure students feel comfortable and that they're not wanting to leave the campus at a given time because they don't like a particular speaker or fellow student's perspective?
That level of comfortability really is the issue and the main talking point when we're talking about this culture war that especially conservative students are fighting on their college campuses. Many students my own age and who identify as a millennial or Generation Z actually believe in regulating free speech if they consider it to be offensive. In fact, 41% of students believe that hate speech ought to be protected. And it's just a very alarming reality when we consider who gets to define what hate speech actually looks like. Ultimately, free speech is a cornerstone of the college experience. And what I've noticed more than anything in the last few years is that 18 or 19-year-olds are leaving their homes and going to their college campus, but maybe they have no political, religious, or value-based foundation at all. And so they set foot on their college campus for their first day of classes and blindly accept everything that the experts, who are their professors, shoving leftist indoctrination down their throat, will tell them as truth, because they don't know to question that reality. They don't know to stand up for their own beliefs or to understand really what the difference between conservatism or leftism even looks like to begin with.
And it can be intimidating, too, to be in a classroom and challenge a professor, especially if you don't feel like you know enough to put forward a strong argument against what they're saying. So that often can put a conservative student, I would say, at a disadvantage in a classroom. Now, I know from my own experience at Regis University, 2008, 2011, I did a campus radio show. That's how I got my start in media, and I was also an editor of the student newspaper and did a lot of opinion pieces for that. And I have talked with faculty and staff at least Regis University, and they have told me they don't think I could do the kinds of things that I did at Regis at that point in time. And I wonder, from your experience at CSU, Colorado State University, and also in interacting with campuses across the country for Turning Point USA, what you're noticing as far as whether something like what I did back then, which was a single host conservative talk show where sometimes I would bring on speakers that were controversial at the time without screening them with the faculty or with the administration, if that could happen today.
I believe it could on particular campuses. And these days, when you talk about a conservative school, we're really talking about a very, very small handful of institutions. But what I have found through communicating with students, through interacting with people whose experiences were a lot like mine, and especially through producing my show On the Front Lines, which interviews conservative students about what it's like to experience that backlash and to fight for conservative values on their campus, what we're seeing is this indoctrination and the backlash and the extreme negativity and even violence propagated against conservative students is not just happening at the Ivy League schools or the UC Berkeleys of the world. These things are happening at Colorado State University, likely at Regis University here in Colorado. Some of the craziest stories I've heard were from the University of Nebraska or Texas State University. So we can no longer take for granted that a more conservative environment or a more conservative state automatically means an easier reality for conservative students on campus.
And so when you're on campus as a student and you're facing this sort of intellectual adversity, shall we say, from being able to speak your mind, how do you recommend and encourage students to navigate those waters, given the sensitivities of college campuses these days? Isabel Brown.
Well, it can definitely be difficult. And when I talk to young people my own age or people experiencing this adversity on their college campus, I don't lie to them or I don't sugarcoat the reality of how difficult it might be to create a conservative community on your campus or to stand up to that intellectual adversity. Sometimes it just takes one person being willing to do something as simple as setting up a table or handing out a button to put on someone's backpack that says socialism sucks to start a whole movement on a college campus and to start pushing back against that intellectual adversity to begin with. The advice that I usually give to our Turning Point USA activists is to start with something simple. Maybe start a club on your campus. Raise your hand in student government and say to your leftist peers that you disagree with the things that student government is spending student fee dollars on. Raise your hand in class and start to ask questions and unravel those false arguments that your professors are trying to make sure that you believe in class every day. Write a paper that actually shares your opinion and not just what you think the professor wants to hear. And when other conservative students who might not be as bold and as brave right away see you doing that, that's when you spur a movement on your campus.
Asking questions, I think that's you said a lot of great things there, but I think the asking questions part is the best, especially if you feel more uncomfortable to speak out, because then you're not presenting a thorough argument and put on the spot to do a point counterpoint, but you're asking questions that may get not only the professor thinking about a response, but other students in the classroom thinking about what you're saying in contrast with what the professor's saying.
And the real problem with college campuses, Jimmy, is that we've created this culture that is so anti-free speech that conservative students feel the need to actually self-censor before they even ask a question or before they even say anything to begin with. 68% of current college students say that the current campus climate prevents them from even starting to express their true opinions for simple fear of offending their classmates or professors. And 83% of those students are conservative, and they agree that that area of self-censorship has been so strong on their college campus that they fear for even speaking up to begin with. And that's ultimately the root of the problem when it comes to restrictions of free speech on campus. We need to create an environment where intellectual diversity and questioning authority and looking for the truth and the answers of things in academia is restored. That used to be the entire epitome of the higher education experience. But unfortunately, many students feel afraid to even speak out to begin with today.
Yeah, that intellectual diversity piece, in fact, back in, what was it? I think it was fall of 2010, I had written a column for Regis University's Highlander newspaper in which I challenged Diversity Week. That was the buzzword at the time. Now you have more buzzwords, but that was the specific buzzword at the time. And I said at the end, I thought we should have more discussion about intellectual diversity because the free play of ideas is what's fundamental to a free society, and that includes listening to different ideas. We always love to play because it's free to choose Friday, some clips of Milton Friedman. And I managed to find him talking a little bit about freedom of speech. I want to play cut 5 here, where he discusses the importance of listening to different ideas and what that means, why that is actually so significant. Again, Milton Friedman, I think this is in the 1990s.
What's important is not only freedom to speak, but freedom to listen. I don't think freedom to speak, includes being subsidized by anybody. I don't believe it includes freedom to use government facilities like a hall to give a speech. What it includes is, on the one hand, the right to hire a hall, to say what you want, and second, and most important, not for the speaker, but for everybody else, the right of everybody else to listen, to hear what they want to hear. And what's happening now is not so much restriction on freedom of speech, but a restriction on freedom to listen. If a professor says something in a course that other people don't like, they come in and disrupt the course so that nobody can listen to them. The people who want to hear him can't hear him. And I think that's absolutely disgraceful. In fact, I think the most important single virtue, human virtue, is tolerance. And tolerance grows out of humility.
And I think Milton Friedman would say exactly the same about guest speakers or students if he were alive today. But the freedom to listen, even more important than the freedom just to speak, Isabel Brown. What did you make of that?
Well, tolerance, talk about a buzzword that should be very prominent on our college campuses that unfortunately has gone out the wayside in the past few years. Freedom of speech is about more than just being able to have the capacity to say whatever you want to say. It's having the maturity and the responsibility to expose yourself to different ideas that you might not have heard of in your own life, or you might not necessarily agree with up until that point in your life. As I mentioned, intellectual diversity used to be the cornerstone of the college experience, but we have told young Americans in the millennial generation and in Generation Z that they shouldn't be questioning anything, and they especially shouldn't be communicating with people that they disagree with. Those things should immediately be shut down. Those conversations shouldn't be happening, and therefore the freedom to listen simply doesn't exist on college campuses today.
Again, we're talking with Isabel Brown with Turning Point USA and host of the video series On the Front Lines, going on to college campuses and engaging and interacting with students. I want to broaden this discussion out because what happens when you graduate college is, theoretically, you go out into the real world and you actually have to engage in conversations with people, not just go to work, but also have mature discussions about important issues of the day. And you're not going to be sheltered in a safe space on a college campus any longer. So I'm curious what you would think about the point that I think is fundamental to this discussion, which is that by doing what we're doing on college campuses, you are ill-preparing young people today for going out into the real world to engage in the battle of ideas. And also what happens on college campuses can really help shape the broader society. And in that way, it can have a much more wide-scale impact that can be negative than just, oh, you can't speak your mind on college campuses or hear from a particular speaker.
Certainly, and college campuses really are the catalyst for the real world of the next generation, of Generation Z Americans, of, as we've seen with millennials who have graduated from college now and are in the quote unquote real world. And I think it's interesting that you use that expression because I hear that a lot, especially from older audiences that I'm lucky to communicate with at fundraisers or at conferences or speaking events. And I'm often told that I shouldn't be so concerned with what's happening on college campuses and with my peers being so intolerant to listen and to debate and engage in those intellectual conversations that accompany freedom of speech. But I usually push back on those people saying, well, what happens when an entire generation of millennials or an entire generation of Generation Z enters the real world at the same time? And we've established a cultural norm of shutting down free speech, of intolerance to different ideas, of intolerance to having conversations to begin with. All of a sudden, the real world looks a lot like what our college campuses look like right now. And I'm very, very grateful to be a part of the fight to stop that at its root on college campuses before that becomes the catalyst of our real world with Turning Point USA. But we are seeing that to some degree today. You're seeing the AOCs of the world running for Congress and being elected and setting the cultural tone for the intolerance on our college campuses to spread throughout the real world.
I think that's so well put, and I couldn't agree more, Isabel Brown. But also, if you're leaving college without having had the capacity to critically think, to think clearly about issues, but also process different ideas, that is going to set you back out in the real world. And so anybody who thinks, oh, well, once you get out of college, you get in the real world and you'll suddenly have a rude awakening, I think is not understanding the dynamics of what's really happening on campuses and what the implications are moving forward in their lives.
Our universities are absolutely doing a disservice to America's next generations by prohibiting us to learn how to critically think, to learn how to engage with people who disagree with us. Look, the world is not a perfect stamp of one person after another with the exact same opinions, with the exact same worldview. And in America, that's actually a great thing in our society. We are one of the last countries on earth that actually allows for and promotes and encourages intellectual diversity to take place. And it's really what makes us the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And by prohibiting America's young people from engaging in that tradition and in that cultural aspect of who we are as a country, we won't look the same in the next few years or decades.
And as we wrap up our conversation with you, Isabel, let's talk about the broader issue of free speech in our culture. How do you handicap where things are at? I mean, obviously, college campuses are a very difficult place for freedom of speech right now. But we've got this broader cultural moment where you see woke activities and woke language on Twitter and social media, and you've got social media organizations that are trying to shut down certain conservative speakers at various times and what have you. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the critical nature of free speech in our overall culture and where things are at right now.
Well, critical is the best word to use to describe the situation where we are and the culture war that we really are fighting when it comes to having free speech allowed on every sort of public platform in our country. We think about free speech as allowing people to say whatever they want when they go outside their house or when they're standing in the middle of their city. But now that concept has actually evolved into the public platforms of today, of the 21st century, with our cell phones and our computers and the social media platforms that we can express ourselves in. And so we're facing this ideological question as a country and as a world of how do you balance that, allowing individuals to share their own beliefs and to share their privileges and their experiences that they've had living in the United States on social media when those big tech companies actually want to shut that speech down because, in their words, it spreads misinformation and it prevents actual dialogue from happening. Ironically, actually shutting down free speech on public platforms is preventing that dialogue. So I think the concept of free speech is much more broad than going out into the public square and saying what you want to say in person. But we have to examine the implications on our college campuses, on social media, when it comes to working from home and working with technologies like Zoom that we've all been experiencing the last few months with COVID-19. And ultimately, it all comes down to the fact that all speech is free speech to some degree. And in America, we do have limitations on that when it comes to actually threatening someone's livelihood or safety. But educating America's next generation that, you know, some people are going to say things that you disagree with, and that's actually okay. But here's the tools that you can use to fight back against that.
It's okay for people to disagree with you? I'm shocked and stunned that somebody who is under the age of 60 would say that right now. Isabel Brown.
I know. Blasphemy, right?
Exactly. Great to talk with you. Thanks so much for helping us kick things off today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jimmy.
And check out our show, On the Front Lines. Once again, Isabel Brown joining us here from Turning Point USA, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks for watching this clip of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel. You do not want to miss our live show. Thanks for your support.
I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.